On the 25th of May 2018, 66.4% of voters opted to repeal the 8th Amendment to the Constitution and legalise abortion in Ireland. As the law stands at the moment, abortion in Ireland is allowed up to 12 weeks or 84 days of pregnancy. After this time, abortion is only available in exceptional circumstances. There is also a mandatory 3-day waiting period from initial consultation before an abortion can be obtained. There is currently a bill at the second stage in the Dáil, sponsored by Breed Smith and other independents, which proposes to radically overhaul this current situation. At the start of the month, an estimated 10,000 people attended a rally in Dublin to oppose this bill. I'm joined on the line by leading pro-life campaigner Niamh Uí Bhriain to explain what this bill entails and to talk about her concerns regarding it. Niamh, you're very welcome and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Vinnie. It's lovely to be on Midlands. How are you?
Not too bad at all. Well, apart from being almost washed away, but sure, I suppose we'd be worse if we were in Spain, Niamh. We'd be fried, you know. So the options are pretty slim, I suppose. Tell us in relation to the changes in repeal. I suppose can we explain firstly where we stand at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people who, even those who voted yes in 2018, Vinnie, would be very surprised if they knew the details of what were in Breed Smith's bill. Because what's happened, I think, in the last 5 years is really quite shocking, even before we come to her bill. So we were told, I think, in the referendum, and a lot of people, you know, who will be listening to this programme will remember that people were told that abortion would be safe, legal and rare. And then in the very first year, sadly, in 2019, there were 6,666 abortions. And those numbers then continued in a similar pattern for 2020 and 2021, despite the COVID lockdowns. And then in 2022, we now know that there was an additional huge jump of almost 25% to 8,156 abortions. And an awful lot of people, I think, are asking, Vinnie, like, you know, gosh, is this what we voted for? And are very concerned about this huge rise in the number of abortions. But sadly, the people who should be examining this most closely, the government, you know, the Minister for Health, the people who make the laws and who implement the policies, don't seem to be interested in that question at all and don't seem to want to take any measures which might help women to choose life instead of undergoing abortion. And on top of that, we have seen a very well orchestrated campaign from people like the National Women's Council. And like, these are NGOs who get massive amounts of taxpayer funding. They have a lot of sympathetic ears in media and inside in Dáil Éireann. And they've been pushing hard to scrap the three-day waiting period, which is something which actually genuinely does help women to choose life instead of abortion. And we've seen this bill that you refer to from Breed Smith. And, you know, again, the way that bill is reported in the media, it focuses on like a desire to scrap the 3-day waiting period and reports on the aspects of the bill that want to take away the right to conscientious objection from doctors. What's been really underreported is that the bill actually wants to take the on-demand provision in the current legislation. So in other words, the part of the legislation that says you can have an abortion for any reason up to 12 weeks and extend that right up to viability, which is about 24 weeks. So if Breed Smith's bill, and it was very surprising to a lot of people that it passed to the second stage, and it passed the second stage in the Dáil, and it only did so with the support of people like Neil Richmond from Fine Gael, the Greens, including Minister Catherine Martin and Roderick O'Gorman, and independents like Verona Murphy. It passed because of their support. It was passed narrowly. You know, I think people would be absolutely appalled to think that that number of TDs would vote for a measure that would legalise abortion on demand right up to 6 months. You know, that is very, very extreme. It's definitely not, I think, what people voted for in 2018.
So that would be your biggest concern then, Niamh. I mean, obviously, the 3-day wait was put in place by the government. I think I always think it's funny. We didn't actually vote on abortion in May 2018. We voted on removing it from the Constitution, and I think we need to make that very clear because sometimes people think we brought in, we actually just allowed the future legislature to decide our abortion journey. Isn't that, or where we stood? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. That's correct, but it's probably important to note as well, Vinnie, that, you know, obviously I was very involved in the campaign, so I remember the polling all around this time, because when the government first brought out the 12-week provision, like a lot of TDs, including Simon Coveney, who was tarnished at the time, said, "Oh, look, we can't support this. This is too extreme. This is not what people will want." And then there was a lot of discussion at Cabinet. This is all followed very closely by the media. So then you had people like Simon Coveney and Niamh Uí Bhriain coming out saying, "Look, we've put in all of these safeguards." And that was used, and you could see it in the polls. You could see that people's support for the provision or for repealing the 8th rose after they were told there was going to be these safeguards, and then fell as kind of discussions around what might happen with the legislation began to intensify. And really, I know that the referendum passed with a very considerable margin, and people kind of think then, oh no, there was a massive support for the referendum, and therefore this kind of is an issue that's dead in the water, no need to discuss anymore. But really, if you look at the polling closely, there was a big turnaround in how people decided to vote just before the referendum. The yes vote had actually fallen below 50% in the polls, and then there was a big swing back to the yes vote because people were being assured that this was necessary to protect women, and because they were being assured about these safeguards. So, and Simon Coveney, I remember, said that he was actually representing Middle Ireland in this referendum, and he came out and made these very strong statements repeatedly that he was like Middle Ireland. He was like many people who were unsure about the referendum and about what would follow the referendum, but he was being reassured by these very important safeguards.
So he has set himself up as a Joe Public character as such. He
did, and in fairness now, the discussions around this in Cabinet, TDs are saying, look, we made this promise in 2018, and then we come, Vinnie, to why is the 3-day waiting period so important? And really, it's very important because the numbers show that a lot of women change their minds and don't return for abortion in those 3 days. And we know this because Carol Nolan TD asks 2 questions every year. And, because this isn't reported otherwise, she has to ask these questions, but she will find out this information every year. She asks how many payments were made to doctors for initial consultations regarding abortion, and then how many payments are made, and then she asks how many completed abortions there were. So in 2021, in 2021, for example, there was 8,284 payments made for the initial consultation, and then there were 6,683 abortions. So about 1,600 women did not go back after the 3-day wait. Now, it's fair to say, Vinnie, that maybe some of them miscarried.
Yes, or maybe you took some of those drugs over the internet that allegedly people buy, or is now that has that stopped?
Because now those drugs are bought are obtained from the GP.
Right,
that practice is now, because most of the abortions are medical abortions. They occur because you take a chemical that you get from the GP, and then perhaps a very small number might have gone to England because they've gone over the 12-week limit. Because we know from the numbers that are going to England that that's a very small number. So on average, it looks like about 1,000 women don't have an abortion because of something that happens in this 3-day period. And surely that's a good thing, Vinnie. I think most ordinary, decent people will be concerned about the big jump in the abortion period. And I think most ordinary, decent people won't want to change the law and risk increasing that number even further. I think the government's focus and its efforts should not be on dismantling any safeguards we currently have, but on tackling the huge rise in the number of abortions and asking what can we do to bring down the abortion rate? What can we do to help women instead? Why aren't we discussing options like adoption? Why aren't we seeing what women need that might help them continue with their pregnancy? We know from studies in other countries that an awful lot of women undergo abortions because they feel they have no choice. It kind of makes a lie of this whole pro-choice mantra. A lot of women feel, I financially am unable to do this. I feel like my boyfriend won't stand by me. I feel like my family won't support me. I feel like I won't be able to finish my course in college. But I don't see anything coming from Stephen Donnelly or from his predecessor, Simon Harris, that might help women choose life instead of abortion. And instead of that, we're seeing this really shocking rise in the number of abortion rates.
Have you a reason for that, Niamh? I mean, is there a way I suppose we were all a little bit surprised by the numbers, no matter what way anyone voted in the first year. And then I kind of thought maybe it was a thing and it's going up. Is that an expected... but the government are almost selling this like a success story, if you know what I mean, which is kind of strange.
Yes, they are. And that's, I think, precisely the correct phrase you picked there, Vinnie, first, because I remember listening to Stephen Donnelly on RTE News at 1, and he was defending, the provision of abortion services in Ireland and saying they were working very successfully. And he was the first person to mention that there were more than 8,000 abortions in 2022, this huge jump. But he seemed so proud of the number. He was saying it with great enthusiasm that there were more than, in his estimation, which was slightly higher than the actual numbers, he was saying 8,500 women had accessed GPs for abortion consultations. And, I thought that as a human being, he would... All of us, I think, feel a little bit shocked by those numbers. But sadly, it's a pattern that we're seeing in other countries too. Like,
I was just about to say, is that the same as happened in other countries that introduced abortion legislation? Do the numbers go up?
The numbers do go up, and like I remember in the abortion referendum, and that was only 5 years ago, we were arguing that if you repealed the age and you brought in the legislation that was being proposed, that we could follow the example of Britain. And at that time, 1 in 5 babies were being aborted. Now that number has gone up to 1 in 4. And they're seeing the kind of increases that we are seeing. We're lagging, obviously, years behind in terms of the actual abortion rate, in terms of the actual numbers of babies who are being aborted. But it's really horrifying. And to me, it's desperately sad that we're not trying to understand why this is happening. Because the government should be, they commissioned research into abortion provision, but it was all about the experience of providers and the experience of women who had abortions. They didn't ask at all. They didn't ask even one woman, according to the evidence given at the Oireachtas Committee, why she might have changed her mind. They certainly didn't ask what we could do to bring down the number of abortions. It's this kind of view that seems to have grasped or taken over the mindset of our politicians that abortion is social good and that nothing can ever question it and there should never be anything done to try to bring down the numbers or to offer a different alternative to women. I don't think that's... Yeah.
Sorry, it's kind of, the narrative at the moment is, yes, it's right. Tell me about the rally. Great success. You had 10,000 people there?
It was marvellous, and I think a lot of those people came because they are upset about things like Breed Smith's bill and because they want to send a powerful message to TDs. I know a lot of people are calling their TDs on the 3-day waiting period as well, and that's why you're having these discussions at Cabinet that TDs are saying, look, it looks like we're reneging on promises made in 2018. But I'll tell you one thing about the rally, Vinnie. Like every person who came to that rally, and it was a beautiful sunny day, thank God we didn't have this lashing rain that we're looking at here. It was sunny at least when we were coming down O'Connell Street in those enormous numbers. O'Connell Street was packed, and you had it's one of the things about the rally is that it's genuinely really diverse. Like you've got people of all ages, people of all backgrounds, people of all faiths and none, people of all races, and a lot of young families, a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers, and it's a lovely kind of bright, joyful day. But everybody there, I think, shared. Like they were sending a very powerful political message, like keep the 3-day waiting period, bring down the number of abortions, help mothers, provide a better alternative, question why women seem to be made to believe that abortion is the default option. Our society shouldn't be operating like that. But I think if you were to look for a common belief amongst everybody in that very diverse crowd, it would be that every abortion is a tragedy. Like there's a life lost, and that we have to do better for women than simply making them feel that abortion is the only choice they have. I think that's the most powerful message every year at the Rally for Life, that we can do better than this. We can offer life-saving alternatives to women to make them feel that they can continue with their pregnancy and have their baby, and that we will support them in that.
Niamh, thank you so much for coming on. You've given a lot of food for thought there, people will be. I know it's a hot button topic and it's very emotive, but at the same time, it needs to be discussed.